The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Windsor Castle as thousands of tourists gathered for the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood Marcus Thompson, a 32-year-old construction worker from Detroit who had saved for 2 years to bring his family to England. His wife Sarah held their 8-year-old daughter Emma's hand, while their teenage son Jake recorded everything on his phone. Marcus had always been proud of his American heritage and often spoke loudly about how his country was better than anywhere else. He wore a baseball cap with an American flag and a shirt that read "Born in the USA." His voice carried over the hushed crowd as he made comments about the fancy dress-up soldiers and their silly hats. The Royal Guard stood at perfect attention, their iconic red uniforms and tall black bearskin hats making them instantly recognizable. These weren't just ceremonial soldiers. They were active military personnel from elite regiments who had served in conflicts around the world. But Marcus saw them only as tourist attractions, entertainment for his vacation photos. As the ceremony began, the precision and discipline of the guards was remarkable. They moved in perfect synchronization, their boots clicking against the stone in rhythmic harmony. The crowd watched in respectful silence, many filming the historic tradition that dated back centuries. Children pressed against the barriers, wide-eyed at the spectacle. Marcus, however, grew increasingly restless. He had expected something more exciting, more interactive. The silence and formality annoyed him. He pulled out his phone and started taking selfies, talking loudly about how boring everything was. Other tourists began to notice his disruptive behavior, shooting disapproving glances his way. "This is supposed to be entertaining?" Marcus complained to his wife, his voice carrying across the quiet courtyard. "Back home, our soldiers actually do something useful instead of playing dress-up." Sarah tugged at his arm, embarrassed by his loud comments, but Marcus was just getting started. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small bottle of hot sauce he had brought from America, claiming it was the real deal compared to anything they had in England. The bottle was nearly empty from meals throughout their trip, but enough remained for what would become an infamous moment. The guards continued their ceremony, unmoved by the chatter around them. Their training had prepared them for all kinds of distractions, weather, crowds, even occasional disruptions. But they maintained their composure and focus, representing centuries of military tradition and the dignity of the crown. Marcus's frustration grew as he realized the guards wouldn't react to his comments or acknowledge him in any way. He felt ignored, insignificant. This wasn't the reaction he had hoped for. In his mind, he deserved some kind of response, some acknowledgement of his presence and his opinions about their performance. The crowd began to shift as the ceremony reached its midpoint. Families adjusted their positions to get better views. Cameras clicked constantly, and tour guides whispered explanations in multiple languages. The atmosphere was one of respectful appreciation for a tradition that had survived wars, political changes, and centuries of history. But Marcus's mood darkened further. He felt the guards were deliberately ignoring him, treating him as if he didn't matter. The hot sauce bottle in his hand became heavier as an idea formed in his mind. He looked at the nearest guard, a tall young man standing perfectly still despite the growing crowd around him. The guard, Lance Corporal James Mitchell of the Coldstream Guards, was a decorated soldier who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He had joined the military at 18, following in his father's footsteps, and had earned his position through years of exemplary service. Standing guard at royal residences was considered an honor, a responsibility he took seriously. James could hear Marcus's complaints but remained focused on his duty. His training had taught him to ignore distractions, to maintain the dignity of his position regardless of what happened around him. He had dealt with difficult tourists before, people who tried to make the guards laugh, move, or break their concentration, but something about Marcus's growing agitation felt different. The ceremony continued as Marcus's internal frustration reached a boiling point. He gripped the hot sauce bottle tighter, his knuckles whitening. Sarah noticed her husband's changing demeanor and tried to calm him down, but Marcus was beyond reason. He felt humiliated by what he perceived as disrespect from the guards. Other tourists began to notice the tension building around Marcus. A few moved away, sensing trouble, Tour. Guides kept their groups at a safe distance while continuing their explanations about the ceremony's historical significance. The mood in that section of the crowd shifted from appreciation to uncomfortable anticipation. Marcus took a step closer to the barrier separating the tourists from the guards. James remained motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead, but his peripheral vision tracked the agitated American. Years of military training had given him an almost supernatural awareness of potential threats, and every instinct told him something was about to happen. The hot sauce bottle felt warm in Marcus's hand as he raised it slightly, testing its weight. Around him, the ceremony continued with its ancient precision, but in that small corner of the courtyard, tension was building toward an inevitable explosion. What happened next would change everything for everyone involved, creating ripples that would spread far beyond the castle walls. Without warning, Marcus's anger exploded into action. He uncapped the hot sauce bottle and hurled it directly at Lance Corporal James Mitchell. The thick red liquid splattered across the guard's pristine red uniform and began dripping down his face under the heavy bearskin hat. The sharp smell of vinegar and peppers filled the air as the sauce burned his eyes and skin. The crowd gasped collectively, a sound that echoed off the ancient stone walls. Camera phones that had been recording the ceremony suddenly swiveled to capture the shocking assault. Children pointed in confusion while their parents pulled them back, uncertain whether this was part of the show or something far more serious. James felt the burning sensation immediately. The hot sauce was industrial strength, designed for serious spice lovers, and it attacked his eyes and any exposed skin with relentless intensity. But something remarkable happened. He didn't move, not even a flinch. Despite the pain, despite the humiliation, despite every human instinct screaming at him to react, James Mitchell remained perfectly still. Marcus stood there for a moment, expecting some dramatic response. He wanted anger, wanted the guard to break character, to prove that these toy soldiers were just regular people playing dress-up. Instead, he watched in growing discomfort as absolutely nothing happened. The guard continued to stare straight ahead as hot sauce dripped from his chin onto his boots. Sarah grabbed her husband's arm, her face pale with shock and embarrassment. "Marcus, what have you done?" she whispered urgently, but her words were lost in the growing murmur of the crowd. Jake stopped recording, his teenage face showing a mixture of horror and secondhand embarrassment that only children can feel when their parents do something unforgivable in public. The other guards in the ceremony continued their duties without missing a step. This was their training at its finest, maintain the dignity of the crown regardless of circumstances. But beneath their stoic exteriors, each man was calculating, assessing, ready to act if the situation escalated beyond a simple assault on their colleague. Tour guides began redirecting their groups away from the scene, speaking in hushed tones to prevent panic while secretly grateful for the dramatic story they would be telling for years to come. Security personnel appeared as if from nowhere, their radios crackling with rapid communications as they established a perimeter around Marcus and his family. Marcus began to realize the magnitude of what he had done. The silence wasn't just from the guard, it was from hundreds of witnesses who had watched him assault a serving member of the British military. His moment of anger was being recorded by dozens of cameras, uploaded to social media in real time, and witnessed by people from around the world. James could feel the hot sauce burning his skin more intensely with each passing second. His eyes watered involuntarily, but his gaze never wavered from the fixed point he had been trained to focus on. Years of military discipline, months of specific training for ceremonial duties, and a deep personal pride in his service combined to keep him absolutely motionless. The crowd's mood shifted dramatically. What had started as curiosity about the disruption was turning into anger toward Marcus. British voices began rising in indignation, calling out, "disgraceful" and "shameful." American tourists in the crowd looked mortified, some approaching Sarah, to apologize for their countrymen's behavior. Marcus found himself surrounded by a sea of hostile faces. The superiority he had felt just minutes earlier evaporated as he realized he was completely outnumbered and entirely in the wrong. His wife's mortified expression, His children's shocked faces and the growing crowd of angry onlookers made him understand that his moment of rage had created a situation far beyond his control. Security officers moved closer, their professional, calm more intimidating than any shouting would have been. These weren't tourists or ceremony participants. They were serious security personnel trained to handle threats to royal properties and personnel. Marcus began to understand that assaulting a guard wasn't just antisocial behavior. It was a crime against the crown itself. James continued to stand perfectly still, but the effort was becoming superhuman. The hot sauce had found every sensitive area on his exposed skin, and his eyes were streaming tears that he couldn't wipe away. His throat burned from inhaling the pepper-laden air, but his breathing remained steady and controlled. This was more than military discipline. It was a testament to the character that had earned him his position. The ceremony around them had subtly shifted. While maintaining their formal positions, the other guards had adjusted their awareness. They were ready to move if their colleague needed assistance, but they also understood that their greatest service to James was to continue the ceremony with perfect precision, proving that one man's childish outburst couldn't disrupt centuries of military tradition. Marcus's family began backing away from him, unconsciously distancing themselves from his actions. Emma, his 8-year-old daughter, looked up at her father with confusion and disappointment that cut deeper than any punishment could. Jake deleted the video he had started, unable to bear the thought of preserving this moment of family shame. The hot sauce continued its burning assault on James's face and uniform, but his stance never wavered. His boots remained perfectly positioned, his shoulders square, his face forward. To any observer, he might as well have been a statue, unmoved by weather, time, or the petty cruelty of an angry tourist. Around the courtyard, the whispers grew louder. People who had witnessed the assault were sharing their outrage with newcomers, creating a ripple effect of disapproval that spread through the crowd like wildfire. Marcus found himself at the center of a growing storm of public condemnation, his actions becoming the focal point of international embarrassment. The security personnel completed their approach, and Marcus realized his brief moment of anger had created consequences that would extend far beyond this morning at the castle. The guards' unwavering professionalism in the face of assault had turned Marcus from an obnoxious tourist into something much worse, a symbol of everything wrong with disrespectful behavior toward those who serve their country. The security officers moved with practiced efficiency, surrounding Marcus without creating additional drama for the watching crowd. Chief Security Officer David Reynolds had been protecting royal properties for 15 years and had seen every type of incident imaginable. But this deliberate assault on a serving guard during a ceremony struck him as particularly offensive. "Sir, I need you to step away from the barrier immediately," Reynolds commanded in a voice that brooked no argument. His tone was professional but carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Marcus looked around desperately, suddenly realizing that his wife and children had moved several steps away from him. Meanwhile, James Mitchell continued his superhuman display of discipline. The hot sauce had now been burning his face for nearly 3 minutes, a length of time that would have sent most people running for water and relief. His eyes were streaming constantly, his skin was on fire, and breathing had become difficult, due to the pepper-infused air around him. Yet he remained statue still. The crowd's reaction intensified as people began to understand the full scope of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a tourist behaving badly. This was a serving soldier enduring deliberate torture while maintaining his duty to the crown. Phones captured every second as James's stoic endurance became a viral moment happening in real time. Marcus finally found his voice, but it came out as a defensive whine rather than the confident American bravado he had displayed earlier. "It was just hot sauce," he protested to Officer Reynolds. "I didn't hurt anybody. These guys are just for show anyway, right? It's not like he's a real soldier or anything." The words hung in the air like a physical slap. Several British voices in the crowd called out in anger, informing Marcus exactly what kind of real soldier he had just assaulted. A retired military officer stepped forward to explain loudly that Lance Corporal Mitchell was a decorated veteran of Afghanistan who who had earned 2 commendations for bravery under fire. Sarah Thompson approached the security officers with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking with embarrassment. "I don't know what got into him. This isn't who he usually is." But even as she spoke the words, she realized they weren't entirely true. Marcus's disrespectful attitude toward other cultures and his need to prove American superiority had been growing throughout their trip. Jake and Emma stood together, watching their father being surrounded by security personnel while hundreds of strangers documented his shame. For Jake, at 16, this was a defining moment in understanding that actions have consequences. For 8-year-old Emma, it was the first time she had seen her father as something other than a hero. Officer Reynolds began the formal process of detaining Marcus. "You are being arrested for assault on a member of Her Majesty's Guard and for disturbing a royal ceremony. You have the right to remain silent, though I should warn you that everything you've done has been recorded by multiple witnesses and will be used in court." As the words "court" and "arrested" sank in, Marcus's face went pale. This was supposed to be a family vacation, a chance to show his children the world beyond their Detroit neighborhood. Instead, he was about to become an international symbol of American tourist behavior at its worst. The legal implications began to dawn on him: foreign court system, potential jail time, massive legal fees. James Mitchell, still standing perfectly still despite the continuing burn of the hot sauce, had become the center of a different kind of attention. Tourists were taking photos not of his humiliation, but of his incredible display of professional dedication. Social media posts were already calling him a hero, praising his discipline and dignity in the face of unprovoked assault. A young British Army veteran in the crowd stepped forward and began explaining James's military record to anyone who would listen. "That man there served 2 tours in Afghanistan," he announced loudly enough for Marcus to hear. "He's seen real combat, lost friends to roadside bombs, and earned medals for saving lives under enemy fire. And this American thinks he can humiliate him with condiments?" The crowd's mood turned increasingly hostile toward Marcus as more details about James's service record spread through the gathering. What had started as general disapproval was becoming active anger. Tour guides had to work harder to keep their groups calm and prevent the situation from escalating into something that might require additional security measures. Marcus was handcuffed with professional efficiency, the metal clicking into place, as Officer Reynolds maintained his calm authority. "Your family will be escorted to the station where they can arrange legal representation," he informed Marcus. "I suggest you use your phone call wisely. You're going to need a very good lawyer." The Boer ceremony continued around them, but James's fellow guards were clearly aware of the situation. Their movements remained precise, but there was an underlying tension that spoke to their readiness to act if their colleague needed assistance. The military brotherhood was evident even in their continued formal positions. As Marcus was led away, he turned back to look at James one final time. The guard remained exactly as he had been when the hot sauce first hit him, perfectly still, eyes forward, maintaining his post despite the obvious pain and discomfort. The contrast between Marcus's complete loss of composure and James's unwavering dignity was stark and absolute. Sarah followed the security escort, trying to explain to her children what would happen next while dealing with her own shock at how quickly their vacation had turned into a legal nightmare. The shame was overwhelming, not just for Marcus's actions, but for her own failure to stop him before he crossed the line from rude tourist to criminal. The hot sauce continued its assault on James's face and uniform, but something remarkable was happening in the crowd. Instead of focusing on the spectacle of his suffering, people were beginning to appreciate the incredible mental strength required to maintain such composure. His endurance was transforming from a display of military discipline into something approaching legend. Officer Reynolds radioed for a vehicle to transport Marcus to the local station, his professional calm never wavering despite his personal disgust at what he had witnessed. In 15 years of security work, he had rarely seen such a clear-cut case of assault combined with such obvious disrespect for British military tradition and service. As Marcus was escorted away in handcuffs, something extraordinary began happening in the crowd. Instead of dispersing after the drama, People stayed to witness what was becoming an incredible display of human endurance and military dedication. James Mitchell had now been standing perfectly still with hot sauce burning his face for nearly 5 minutes, a feat that seemed to transcend normal human capability. A young girl, perhaps 10 years old, tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed at James. "Mummy, why isn't the soldier wiping his face?" she asked innocently. Her mother, a British Army wife who understood military discipline, knelt down to explain. "Because he's doing his duty, love. No matter what happens, he stays at his post. That's what real soldiers do." The explanation rippled through the crowd as parents used James's example to teach their children about dedication, service, and character. What had begun as a shocking assault was transforming into an impromptu lesson in values that money couldn't buy and schools couldn't fully teach. Children who had come to see colorful uniforms were witnessing the substance beneath the ceremony. Meanwhile, at the police station, Marcus sat in a holding cell contemplating the magnitude of his mistake. The duty officer had informed him that assaulting a member of the Royal Guard was taken very seriously by British courts, with potential sentences including significant jail time and deportation, with a permanent ban from re-entering the United Kingdom. His lawyer, hastily arranged through the American consulate, painted a grim picture of his legal situation. Back at the castle, James continued his vigil, despite the increasing difficulty. The hot sauce had mixed with his natural perspiration, creating a burning sensation that covered most of his exposed skin. His eyes were completely bloodshot, streaming constant tears that he couldn't wipe away. His throat felt raw from breathing, the pepper-laden air, but his breathing remained steady and controlled. A news crew had arrived, alerted by social media posts about the incident. The reporter, initially planning to cover the tourist's assault on the guard, found herself documenting something far more compelling, a masterclass in military discipline that was captivating hundreds of witnesses. Her live broadcast began, reaching audiences around the world. Officer Reynolds returned to check on James's condition, concerned about the prolonged exposure to the hot sauce. He approached carefully, speaking in low tones to avoid disrupting the ceremony further. "Lance Corporal Mitchell," he said quietly. "Medical assistance is available if you need it. No one would question your braking position under these circumstances." James's response came without moving his lips or changing his expression, but Reynolds heard it clearly. "I maintain my post, sir." 4 words that summarized everything about military service, personal integrity, and commitment to duty regardless of circumstances. Reynolds stepped back, understanding that he was witnessing something that would be talked about for generations. The crowd had grown larger as word spread through social media and local news. Tourists who had planned to visit other attractions were diverting to witness what was being called the most incredible display of military discipline in modern history. The ceremony continued around James, but he had become the central focus of attention. Sarah Thompson watched the news coverage from the police station waiting room, her heart breaking as she realized the full scope of her husband's actions. The reporter was interviewing military experts who explained James's service record in Afghanistan, his decorations for bravery, and the significance of his current display of duty. Her husband had attacked a genuine war hero. An elderly veteran in a wheelchair had maneuvered through the crowd to get closer to James's position. World War II medals on his jacket caught the light as he saluted the young guard with a trembling hand. "That's what we fought for," he told anyone who would listen. "Not the ceremonies or the buildings, but men like that. Real soldiers who understand what service means." The hot sauce assault was entering its 7th minute, and James showed no signs of breaking. Military personnel in the crowd began explaining to civilians just how extraordinary his endurance was. The combination of intense pain, public humiliation, and physical discomfort would have broken most people in the first 30 seconds. James was proving that some things truly were more important than personal comfort. Medical personnel had been placed on standby, ready to assist if James showed any signs of distress requiring immediate attention. They watched him carefully, amazed by his vital signs which remained steady despite what should have been overwhelming physical stress. His military training had prepared him for extreme situations, But this was testing limits that few people ever face. Marcus's children watched the news coverage with growing understanding of what their father had done. Jake, 16, and beginning to understand concepts like honor and respect, felt ashamed of sharing Marcus's last name. Emma, only 8, couldn't understand why the nice soldier didn't clean his face, but she knew her daddy had done something very wrong to him. The ceremony was approaching its scheduled conclusion, but no one in the crowd was leaving. They sensed they were witnessing history, not just military history, but human history. James Mitchell was demonstrating that character truly was what you do when no one is watching. Except in his case, everyone was watching, and the whole world was taking notes. As the minutes ticked by, James's display of discipline was reaching mythical proportions. Military academies would study this incident for decades, using it as an example of what true military bearing looks like under impossible circumstances. His name would be remembered long after Marcus Thompson was forgotten. The hot sauce continued, its relentless assault, but James Mitchell continued his relentless duty. Neither force was willing to yield, creating a standoff between human endurance and chemical torture that was fascinating audiences around the globe. Social media was exploding with admiration for his incredible display of professionalism under the most trying circumstances imaginable. A small group of serving British military personnel had gathered at the edge of the crowd, their respect and admiration evident in their posture and attention. They understood better than anyone what James was enduring and why he was enduring it. His performance was reflecting credit on every uniform in the British Armed Forces, showing the world what their training and values could produce when tested by fire. As the ceremony entered its final phase, James Mitchell had maintained his position for an incredible 8 minutes while hot sauce continued burning his face and eyes. The crowd had grown to nearly 1,000 people, many arriving specifically to witness what news outlets were calling the most extraordinary display of military discipline in peacetime history. The other guards in the ceremony began their final synchronized movements, but their awareness of James's situation was evident in the subtle precision of their actions. They were performing not just for the tourists or tradition, but in solidarity with their fellow soldier who was proving that their training and values were unbreakable even under assault. At precisely the moment the ceremony concluded, something remarkable happened. Without any signal or communication, James Mitchell took one step backward, executed a perfect about-face, and marched away from his post with the same precision he had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause that echoed off the castle walls like thunder. The timing was perfect, not a second too early, not a moment too late. Despite 8 minutes of torture, despite pain that would have incapacitated most people, despite the global attention and pressure, James had maintained his post for exactly the required time and departed exactly when protocol demanded. His professionalism was absolutely flawless. As James disappeared into the castle, the crowd's applause continued for several minutes. Many people were openly crying, moved by what they had witnessed. Parents lifted children onto their shoulders to get better views of where the remarkable soldier had stood. Tour guides abandoned their scripts to talk about what they had just seen happen in front of them. The news reporter who had covered the incident found herself struggling to maintain professional composure during her live broadcast. "I've covered wars and disasters," she told her audience, "but I've never seen anything like the courage and dedication we just witnessed. Lance Corporal Mitchell has shown the world what true heroism looks like in the face of unprovoked cruelty." Social media exploded with videos, photos, and commentary about James's performance. The hashtag #JohnRoyalGuardHero began trending worldwide within hours. Military personnel from dozens of countries posted their admiration and respect. The incident was being taught in military academies before the day was over, becoming an instant case study in discipline and duty. Meanwhile, Marcus Thompson sat in his cell facing the reality of his actions. His lawyer had explained that the incident was being treated as an international embarrassment, with both British and American officials expressing outrage at his behavior. The assault charges were serious enough, but the global humiliation he had brought to American tourists everywhere had made his case a diplomatic issue. Sarah Thompson was dealing with her own nightmare. Hotels were canceling their reservations after learning about Marcus's identity. Tour companies refused to serve them. Even other American tourists were avoiding the family, ashamed to be associated with Marcus's actions. Their dream vacation had become a living hell of shame and isolation. The American embassy had assigned a cultural attaché to help smooth relations, but the damage was extensive. Marcus's actions had reinforced every negative stereotype about American tourists: loud, disrespectful, and convinced of their own superiority. Diplomatic efforts to minimize the incident were hampered by the viral videos showing exactly what had happened. Back at the castle, James Mitchell was finally receiving medical attention. The hot sauce had caused significant irritation to his eyes and skin, but nothing that wouldn't heal completely. More importantly, his commanding officer wanted to ensure he was emotionally and mentally prepared to deal with the sudden international attention his actions had generated. "How do you feel about what happened out there?" Colonel Harrison asked, as medics treated James's burns. The question was both professional and personal. Harrison needed to know if his soldier was coping with the trauma of assault and the pressure of global recognition. James's response was characteristically measured. "I did my duty, sir. Nothing more, nothing less. The tourist's actions reflected on him, not on the guard or the crown. I maintained the dignity of my position, as I was trained to do." His humility in the face of worldwide praise was as impressive as his endurance. During the assault, the medical team confirmed that James would make a full recovery with no lasting effects from the hot sauce attack. His eyes were severely irritated but not permanently damaged. His skin would heal within days. More remarkably, his blood pressure and heart rate had remained steady throughout the entire ordeal, testament to both his physical fitness and mental discipline. News outlets around the world were running the story as their lead item. Military experts were calling James's performance superhuman, while etiquette specialists used the incident to discuss respect for other cultures and the importance of proper tourist behavior. The story had become bigger than just one man's bad decision and one soldier's good character. Colonel Harrison made the decision to award James a commendation for his exceptional performance under trying circumstances. While such awards were rarely given for ceremonial duties, the colonel felt that James's actions had brought tremendous credit to the regiment and demonstrated the highest standards of military bearing under the most difficult conditions imaginable. The contrast between the two men's responses to pressure couldn't have been more stark. Marcus had lost control completely in a moment of minor frustration, allowing his anger to override his judgment and create international consequences. James had maintained perfect control during 8 minutes of deliberate torture, never allowing pain or humiliation to interfere with his duty. As news of James's commendation spread, messages of support poured in from military units around the world. Veterans organizations, serving personnel, and military families expressed their pride in his performance. He had become not just a symbol of British military excellence, but of what military service could achieve in terms of character development and personal integrity. The hot sauce attack that Marcus had intended as humiliation had instead become James's moment of triumph. What was meant to break him had revealed his unbreakable spirit. The assault that was supposed to prove the guards were just for show had demonstrated that they were among the most disciplined soldiers in the world, capable of maintaining their composure under any circumstances. 3 weeks after the incident, the consequences for both men had become clear, creating a stark contrast between dignity and disgrace that would follow them for years. Marcus Thompson stood in a British courtroom facing Judge Margaret Whitworth, who had seen thousands of cases but rarely one that had generated such international attention and universal condemnation. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Whitworth began, her voice carrying the weight of legal authority and moral judgment, "your actions represent not just an assault on Lance Corporal Mitchell, but an attack on the values of service, dignity, and respect that form the foundation of civilized society. You have brought shame not only upon yourself, but upon your country and your family." The sentence was severe but fair. 6 months in prison, followed by immediate deportation and a lifetime ban from entering the United Kingdom. Additionally, Marcus would be required to pay substantial fines and court costs. along with compensation to Lance Corporal Mitchell. The judge's final words would haunt him forever. "You came to our country as a guest and behaved as a barbarian." Marcus's family had already returned to Detroit, unable to bear the shame and media attention. Sarah had filed for divorce, taking the children and moving in with her parents. Jake and Emma would grow up remembering their father not as a hero, but as the man who humiliated their family on the world stage through his inability to control his temper and respect others. The video of Marcus's assault and James's incredible response had been viewed over 50 million times across various platforms. It had become a teaching tool in schools, military academies, and parenting classes. Marcus would forever be remembered as the negative example. What happens when you let anger overcome decency and respect for others? Meanwhile, Lance Corporal James Mitchell had been promoted to corporal and awarded the Military Cross for exceptional gallantry. The citation read, "For displaying extraordinary military bearing and personal courage while under deliberate assault, bringing exceptional credit to the Crown, the British Army, and the traditions of military service worldwide." The ceremony took place at Buckingham Palace, where James was personally congratulated by senior members of the royal family. His parents, working-class people from Yorkshire, watched their son receive one of the highest military honors available, tears streaming down their faces as they realized how proud they should be of the man they had raised. James's story had inspired countless young people to consider military service. Recruitment offices reported significant increases in applications, with many citing his example as motivation. Military wives shared his story with their children, explaining what Daddy's uniform really meant and why military families sacrificed so much for their country's service. The hot sauce company, whose product had been used in the attack initially, tried to capitalize on the attention, but public backlash was so severe, they quickly issued apologies and donated significant money to veterans' charities. No one wanted to be associated with Marcus's actions, even tangentially. Educational institutions around the world began using the incident as a case study in character development, cultural sensitivity, and the consequences of poor decision-making. Business schools analyzed the reputational damage to American tourism. Military academies studied James's response as an example of perfect discipline under pressure. Sarah Thompson, now Sarah Williams after reverting to her maiden name, struggled to rebuild her life in Detroit. The children faced bullying at school where classmates had seen the viral videos of their father's behavior. She eventually moved to another state, hoping to escape the shadow of Marcus's actions and give her children a fresh start away from their father's infamy. Marcus himself served his sentence in relative obscurity, protected from other inmates, who might have targeted him for his attacks on a serving soldier. Upon release, he found employment difficult to obtain, as his name and face had become synonymous with tourist misbehavior and disrespect for military personnel. Background checks inevitably revealed his criminal record and international notoriety. James, by contrast, had become something of a celebrity. Though he handled the attention with the same dignity he had shown during the assault, he gave speeches at military events, visited schools to talk about service and character, and became an unofficial ambassador for British military excellence. His message was always the same: duty comes first, personal comfort second. The incident had created ripple effects throughout the tourism industry. Travel companies began including mandatory cultural sensitivity training for American tourists visiting the UK. Hotels developed codes of conduct specifically addressing respect for local customs and military traditions. The Marcus Thompson incident became shorthand for everything tourists shouldn't do abroad. 5 years later, James Mitchell had been promoted to sergeant and was serving as an instructor at Sandhurst Military Academy, teaching future officers about leadership, discipline, and military bearing. His classroom included a photograph from that day at Windsor Castle, not as a monument to his suffering, but as a reminder of what true military character looks like when tested. The lesson he taught his cadets was simple but profound. Anyone can maintain discipline when it's easy. The measure of a soldier is what you do when maintaining discipline becomes the hardest thing in the world. That day, standing still was harder than any battle I'd faced in Afghanistan, but it was also the most important stand I ever took. Marcus. Thompson, meanwhile, had become a cautionary tale told in anger management classes and cultural sensitivity seminars. His moment of rage had cost him his marriage, his relationship with his children, his reputation, and his freedom. He worked night shifts at a warehouse outside Detroit, his co-workers unaware of his infamous past, though internet searches of his name still brought up the videos that had made him globally notorious. The hot sauce stains had been cleaned from James's uniform within hours, but the stain on Marcus's character proved permanent. Employment applications asked about criminal records, and Marcus had to explain his assault conviction repeatedly. Each explanation brought back the shame of that morning when 8 minutes of one man's discipline had exposed a lifetime of another man's character flaws. James's example had inspired legislation in several countries establishing stronger protections for ceremonial military personnel. The Mitchell Protocol required enhanced security at royal ceremonies and created specific legal penalties for assaults on serving guards. His 8 minutes of endurance had created lasting changes that would protect future generations of soldiers performing ceremonial duties. The tourism industry had implemented the Windsor Standards, guidelines for respectful behavior at cultural and military sites. Marcus's assault had become the textbook example of what not to do, while James's response had become the gold standard for grace under pressure. Together, they had redefined how the world viewed both military service and tourist responsibility. The end. Marcus had intended to humiliate a soldier and prove American superiority. Instead, he had elevated that soldier to hero status while demonstrating the worst aspects of American arrogance abroad. His hot sauce attack, meant to last seconds, had created consequences that would last lifetimes. James Mitchell continued serving his country with the same quiet dignity he had shown that day at Windsor Castle. He never spoke bitterly about Marcus or the attack, understanding that his true victory lay not in his attacker's punishment, but in his own unwavering commitment to duty, honor, and service above self. The 8 minutes that changed everything had proven a simple truth. Character is revealed not in comfort but in crisis. When the hot sauce hit, 2 men's true natures were exposed to the world. One showed what military training and personal integrity could achieve. The other showed what happens when anger and disrespect override basic human decency. Marcus Thompson's moment of rage had lasted seconds. Lance Corporal James Mitchell's moment of grace had lasted 8 minutes. But the difference between the 2 men, and the consequences of their choices, would last forever.